There is a dog sleeping at the foot of your bed right now, or a cat on your windowsill, or a fish circling a glass tank on your desk. You feed it. You pay for its medical care. You worry about it when you travel. You have probably, at some point, described it as a member of the family. And you will never eat it. This arrangement strikes most modern people as entirely natural. Of course you keep a pet. Of course you form an emotional bond with an animal that provides you with no nutritional value. Of course you grieve when it dies in a way that surprises even you with its intensity. But step back far enough and this behavior looks genuinely strange. You are a biological organism that requires calories to survive. You are sharing those calories with another biological organism that provides you with nothing in return that could be measured in a laboratory. By any strict accounting of survival economics, this makes no sense at all. And yet, humans have been doing it for a very long time. The question is why? And the answer, when you look at it carefully, turns out to reveal something profound about what humans actually are and what they have always needed from the world beyond food and shelter and physical safety. The oldest unambiguous evidence of humans keeping animals they did not intend to eat comes from burial sites. A grave discovered at Ain Malaha in Israel, dating to roughly 12,000 years ago, contained the skeleton of an elderly person buried with one hand resting on the skeleton of a puppy. The position was deliberate. The arm had been arranged after death to maintain contact with the animal. Whoever buried this person understood that the relationship mattered enough to honor it in death. But wolves, the ancestors of domestic dogs, were almost certainly in close relationship with human groups long before this burial. Genetic evidence suggests that the domestication process began somewhere between 15 and 40,000 years ago, making the human-dog relationship one of the oldest interspecies partnerships in the archaeological record. And the critical thing about this partnership in its earliest stages is that it was not simply a matter of humans deciding dogs would be useful. It was a relationship that developed gradually, through proximity, through mutual observation, through the slow building of something that researchers now call interspecies trust. Early wolves that were bold enough to approach human camps, tolerant enough of human presence to remain without fleeing, and calm enough to coexist without aggression, would have been the ones that benefited from the association, scavenging scraps at the edge of camp, learning the rhythms of human activity, gradually becoming less wolf and more something else. Humans who found these animals useful, as sentinels against predators, as hunting companions, as something warm to sleep beside on cold nights, would have reinforced the association. Over thousands of generations, across an accumulation of individual relationships too numerous to count, the wolf became the dog. But dogs were not the only animals ancient humans kept without necessarily eating them. Archaeological evidence from sites across the ancient world shows humans keeping birds, primates, foxes, deer, and various other animals in ways that suggest companionship rather than livestock management. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, one of the earliest known ceremonial sites, dating to roughly 12,000 years ago, carvings and animal remains suggest a complex relationship between humans and wild animals that goes well beyond simple predator-prey dynamics. The sheer variety of animals represented in the carvings at Göbekli Tepe, including foxes, vultures, scorpions, and snakes alongside more familiar prey species, suggests that the human relationship with the animal world was already, at this early date, deeply layered with meaning that extended far beyond nutritional value. Animals were not just food. They were symbols, companions, messengers, and perhaps something that does not translate easily into any modern category. At various prehistoric sites in the Americas, the remains of kept macaws, parrots, and other birds have been found far from their natural ranges, suggesting they were transported and maintained specifically for their feathers, their calls, or simply their presence. In the desert Southwest, communities that had no obvious practical reason to maintain large, loud, difficult-to-feed tropical birds did so across generations, suggesting that the value being extracted from these relationships was entirely non-caloric. Among contemporary hunter-gatherer communities, the keeping of non-food animals is widespread and well-documented. The anthropologist Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, who has studied Amazonian indigenous communities extensively, describes practices of animal adoption that are deeply embedded in the social and spiritual life of these groups. Orphaned animals, particularly young ones whose mothers have been killed, are frequently brought back to camp and raised by women who sometimes nurse them alongside their own children. These animals are not kept as future food. They are kept as kin. They are given names, spoken to, mourned when they die, and understood as having a form of personhood that makes eating them unthinkable, even in communities where their wild counterparts are hunted regularly. This distinction between the individual animal you know and the category of animal you hunt is one that appears across human cultures with remarkable consistency. Once a relationship has formed, once an animal has become known as a particular individual with particular behaviors and a particular history, it crosses a psychological threshold that makes it categorically different from prey. You do not eat the animal you know by name. This is not a rule that anyone needs to teach. It appears to operate automatically, at a level below deliberate reasoning. Why does this threshold exist? And why did keeping animals that could not be eaten prove beneficial enough, over a long enough period, to become a widespread human behavior? One part of the answer is practical. An animal that lives in close proximity to a human group and has been habituated to human presence becomes a remarkably effective early warning system. Dogs, obviously, are acutely sensitive to sound and smell in ways that humans are not, and a dog that alerts to the approach of a predator or a rival group in the night provides a survival benefit that is genuinely difficult to quantify, but almost certainly significant. Some researchers have argued that the adoption of dogs into human camps may have allowed human groups to extend their sleeping periods more safely, because the dog's vigilance partially compensated for the reduction in human alertness during sleep. But the practical argument only goes so far. It explains dogs, at a stretch. It does not explain the macaw in the desert. It does not explain the orphaned fox kit raised through the winter. It does not explain the way a hunter-gatherer woman nurses a young monkey alongside her own infant. Something else is operating in these relationships that the survival accounting does not capture. That something else may be one of the most distinctively human capacities there is: the ability to extend the circle of social recognition beyond the species boundary, to look at another creature, however different, and recognize in it something that activates the same neural systems involved in recognizing and caring for members of your own group. The neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp, whose work on the effective neuroscience of mammals identified 7 primary emotional systems shared across species, found that the care system, the neurological circuitry underlying parental attachment and nurturing behavior, can be activated by the young of other species as well as one's own. Baby animals trigger the same basic neurological response in humans as human infants do, which is why the sight of a puppy or a young monkey produces an almost involuntary warmth in most people, regardless of their cultural background. This is not a learned response. It is an ancient biological circuit being activated by a stimulus that is similar enough in its basic parameters to the one it evolved to respond to. Research by Meg Daley Olmert, who studied the neurochemical basis of the human-animal bond, found that positive interaction with animals triggers the release of oxytocin in humans, the same hormone involved in social bonding, trust, and parental attachment between human beings. The body does not distinguish sharply between a bonding interaction with a person and a bonding interaction with an animal that has become sufficiently known and trusted. The same ancient chemistry runs through both experiences, which may be one reason why the grief at losing a beloved animal can feel, to the person experiencing it, indistinguishable from the grief at losing a close human companion. Ancient humans who brought orphaned animals into camp and found themselves caring for them were not making a decision to override their survival instincts in favor of sentiment. They were following a biological impulse that had been shaped by millions of years of selection pressure favoring the nurturing of small, vulnerable, dependent creatures. The fact that the creature was sometimes a wolf cub rather than a human infant was, at the level of the neural circuitry involved, a relatively minor detail. Picture the camp in the late afternoon. Smoke rises from a low fire. Children play at the edge of the cleared ground. And near the fire, on a woven mat, a young woman sits with a small animal curled in her lap, its breathing slow and trusting. She strokes it without thinking about it, the way you stroke a cat without deciding to. Her attention is elsewhere, on a conversation, on a piece of work in her other hand. But the animal is there, warm and present, and her hand keeps moving. There is nothing here that requires explanation in terms of calories or survival efficiency. It is simply a human being and another creature sharing space, each made calmer by the other's presence in a way that has been happening for so long that neither species remembers when it started. This is one of the oldest things about us. Older than agriculture, older than pottery, older than most of the things we usually point to when we talk about what makes humans distinctive. The capacity to look across the species boundary and see someone worth caring for. You did not invent the impulse to keep an animal you would never eat. You inherited it from people who lived in a world with no walls between the human and the animal, who brought orphaned wolf cubs in from the cold and did not ask themselves whether it made economic sense, who buried their dead with one hand resting on the animal that had kept them company through the long dark of their nights. The dog at the foot of your bed is not a modern luxury. It is one of the oldest relationships your species has ever had. And it was never about the food.